What did Viking Age Scandinavians eat? And can I do that for an entire week? No coffee, no sugar, no potatoes, no tomato. Hi, my name is Megan Formanek, author of the Viking Trading Lands series and public historian. I've spent more than a decade researching the Viking Age, from clothing to their beliefs to their conquests. And of course I've researched what they ate, because who doesn't love a feasting scene in a historical novel? So with all of that under my belt, I wanted to dig into the food of the Viking Age. Now, if you've seen my YouTube short series, you'll know that I spent an entire month recreating Viking Age dishes. In popular media, Vikings are often portrayed as eating from a feast table laden with enormous things like turkey legs, gorging themselves on meat until their beards glisten with fat, and then binging on the harvests of the countrysides they raided. But is this accurate? And how do we know what the Viking Age Scandinavians really ate? For this experiment, we will be looking at what the people in what we now call modern Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Denmark, and also looking at the Viking Rus, which is my area of study and the concentration of my novels in the Viking Trading Lands series. And we start first, as always, with the sources. Most of the references that we have to the food in the sagas is implied. Nothing so specific as a recipe, but we might get some imputations as to the preparation of the meal. Largely, they speak of food as a central element to celebration and the requirement of hospitality. So let's have a look at some of the mentions in the sagas. In the Lexdala saga, specifically Egil's saga, there are references to a salmon river and lambs grazing, which are still alive at this point. We also have a mention of a funeral feast, though no specific foods are mentioned. And we also have mention of 2 dairy buildings. In the poem of Harbard and Thor, we have plentiful rations when traveling and eating well at feasts. In the Rigsmal, we have talk of bread, and this one's actually exciting because it gives us an idea of what the bread was like. Thick, heavy and swollen with husks. One can only imagine that it's quite a grainy bread, not the nice refined bread that we're used to in today's modern society. From the same source, we also have mentions of well-cooked bird. And if we look to the east, the works of Ahmed ibn Fadlan mention communal eating and drinking as being a central element of celebration. And if we head back to the north, Adam of Bremen's writing talks about men and women consuming the flesh of sacrificed animals. With so little to go on in the written sources, we can turn to another area, and that's archaeological evidence. Coprolites can be a great source of information, and if you're not familiar what a coprolite is, it's fossilized excrement. And one example that we have is called the Lloyd's Bank coprolite, which is located in the Jorvik Viking Centre in York in the United Kingdom. This particular example shows that this individual had a diet that was heavy in grains and meat, but this is not indicative of the entire Viking Age diet. We also have examples of middens, which are kind of like a medieval rubbish pit, a place where debris and refuse was discarded. Here, this can tell us a lot about what the people ate based on the bones of the animals and the scraps of food they threw away. And it's finds like this one in Denmark, which have the remains of pollen from the production of honey. We also have the invaluable resource of cooking pots, that being iron pots or soapstone dishes with food remnants on them. Some of these pots have been found in burial sites such as Tuna and Oseberg, and remnants in these dishes include deer, goat, mutton, lamb, pork, chicken, geese, plover, grouse, pigeon, pike, rudd, beam, perch, herring, cod, haddock, mackerel, smelt, oysters, cockles, mussels, winkles, eel, salmon, buttermilk, egg, cheese, oats, wheat, barley, rye, fava beans, carrots, parsnips, turnips, spinach, cabbage, sloes, plums, apple, bilberries, blackberries, raspberries, elderberries, hazelnut, walnut, dill, coriander, henbane, linseed, honey, spelt, hawthorn, duck, cherry, strawberry, leaf, crabapple, mustard seed, whale, ling, hare, rowan berries, and fennel. Pretty much, if it was available in the Viking Age, they were eating it. Another valuable resource that we can tap into is isotope analysis, where historians can analyze the skeletal remains, allows historians to reconstruct deceased diet during their lifetime. And while this evidence can give us a general overview of the types of ingredients that were available during the Viking Age, it doesn't give us any recipes or inform us how these things went together. So without primary resource recipes, we turn to living history or experimental archaeology, which attempts to reconstruct those brief mentions in the sagas and those ingredients found in archaeological sites to try and figure out how it all went together and how Viking Age Scandinavians really ate. At this point, it's important to understand that there were largely 2 meals in the Viking Age, one being dagmal, or the day meal, and the other one being nattmal, or night meal. The day meal was generally eaten after the first chores, and the night meal after the conclusion of the day. Quite a few of the Viking Age museums have great resources on Viking Age recipes and recreating those kind of things, so you can get some great inspiration from these sources, as well as people who are also trying these things out in living archaeology or living history. I'll credit everybody who I've used in the description field below if you'd like to try them for yourself. Now, because we have dagmal and nathmal, I'll be eating like that and not the modern construction of 3 meals a day. I'll also be reducing portion sizes from what might have been served during the Viking Age because I'm not living the Viking life at the same time. As you know, I'm an author and a historian, so a lot of my time is spent in books and not outside doing farm work. I'll also be eating a more varied diet in this week than a typical Viking Age Scandinavian, and that's because I want to show you how people might have eaten differently throughout the seasons and in different social settings. This is how our week will go. For the first few days, I'll eat as a reasonably wealthy farmer or merchant family would have. On day 4, we'll be attending a feast at a jarl's longhouse before departing for a 2-day journey to a neighbouring island. And we'll round out by eating at our friend's hospitality. All right, let's begin our week eating like a Viking. This morning we're going to make something pretty typical, something really hearty that will fill our bellies after our morning chores. It's called grautr, or basically Viking Age porridge. So let's do it. Grautr is very straightforward to make. Just chuck some oats into a pot with water, salt it, and cook it. This method is the simplest way for a basic breakfast where the taste of the oats is in focus. In fancier households or for special occasions, you could add bits of cooked meat or even sweeten it with honey and berries. Today I'm going for a very basic variety and it tastes just as you would imagine, very basic. I guess the better your oats were, the better it would taste. And the bit of salt really makes it savoury. Something Western porridge doesn't really do anymore, unless you're like my family, who travelled around Scotland when I was young and ended up having oats the Scottish way, which was just like this version, and not at all what myself or my 10-year-old sister were expecting. I've had a really busy day today, and I just want to make something no fuss. So what I'm going to do is basically make the nightly stew or broth of the Viking Age. Anything that was kind of lying around bone-wise, I've got a ham bone that I'm going to put in with some herbs and a little bit of veg, and that's going to give me a nice broth. You could also put things like grains in if you want to thicken it up, as in like make it more stodgy, and depending on what work you've done. But I don't really need that tonight. I don't really need the grains, so I'm just going to put some vegetables in, and I don't need to put any salt or anything in because the bone's already going to be salty. If you're wondering why the sun is still up, I'm in the southern hemisphere, but I'm right near the equator in far north Queensland, so our sun doesn't go down until a little bit later. Not super late, like 6 o'clock, but I like to eat my dinner early to give myself some time for digestion before I go to sleep. So let's go and make our stew. Good morning, it's day 2 of eating like a Viking, and today I'm pretty tired. I'm starting the day off pretty tired and we've got lots of content to make today. So I'm going to do a Viking Age leftover. So taking some of the broth that we made last night and adding a handful of barley just to make it a little bit more fortifying for the day. We're also going to make bread on the side, which is made from oat bran. So let's get into it. So this morning I'm boiling up last night's leftovers, chucking in a handful of barley grains and starting on some fresh bread for the day. In the Viking Age, women of the house or slaves would have ground the grain freshly for use, but I don't have a quern, but I do have oat bran, which gives the bread a lovely nutty flavour and a whole lot more protein and fibre than a modern white loaf would. And unlike a white loaf or any loaf of modern reckoning, this bread does not use yeast. It's 3 simple ingredients: flour, water and salt, which you mix together and knead until smooth. Divide into equal pieces, roll into flat rounds before dry frying over a medium heat until they puff up a bit and become a golden colour. Lucky for us, the boys have been down to the river fishing and have brought back some lovely fish, which we're going to cook in a stew of leeks, dill and nettle. But instead of nettle, we're subbing it out for spinach because we can't get nettle at the moment. Using our leftover and now quite stale bread, we'll be crafting a little herbed butter to dollop into the stew and dip our bread into to breathe fresh life into something that's past its prime. And it's surprisingly tasty. Welcome back to day 3 of eating like a Viking. Today we're eating grautr again. So we're making porridge again, which was pretty common. Some people, especially the lower class, might have eaten this for most of their meals. And as we are saying, it is kind of spring, summertime, we have got some milk. So when your sheep, goats, cows were in the season of providing milk, good quality spring milk based on the good grass, you would probably add some milk or cream to your grautr. I also have some apples. You could have used dried or any other fruit. Berries are beautiful too, nuts, and some seeds. So let's go ahead and make it. I think it's gonna be really tasty. So we're gonna start by sweating down the apples a little bit until they get a bit soft. Then we'll add the oats and the milk and cook until creamy. And I'm actually really excited about this breakfast, so let's dig in. Although the humble grautr is fine on its own, the addition of fruit and fat from the dairy really does make life that little bit sweeter. What I wouldn't give for a sprinkle of cinnamon on it. And although this was available during the Viking Age, it was an expensive spice and probably not something I could have afforded. I've still got a couple of rounds of bread, which are now like frisbees and likely to break a tooth if I tried to eat them on its own. So tonight I'm making an onion and sage bread soup. To begin with, I'm throwing in some leeks, onion, garlic, sage, thyme, and some bones to create a thin but flavorful soup. Then I'm going to tear up the bread as best I can. You might have to pour a little water on them to get them started, but once they soften up, combine the bread with some butter, thyme, salt, and an egg. If they're still too tacky to roll into balls, you can add a little more flour. Then plop the bread balls into the hot soup and let them cook. Okay, so that's a close on day 3. So far, I feel like all I've eaten is bread and oats and broth, which just makes it all expand in my stomach, and I'm feeling very, very full. But I guess that's just part of what life might have been like at certain times. Also, as someone who lives in the far north of Australia, I'm really missing my fresh fruit and of course vegetables, and I mean coffee goes without saying. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow because there are fresh fruit. Well, there's fruit, there's vegetables and some meat. We're going to the jarl's feast. I will see you tomorrow. Good night. Good morning, it's day 4 and I'm doing some filming this morning. So I'm looking forward to something light for breakfast. I'm going to have some skyr. Now, if you're familiar with the Viking Age dairy and the importance of skyr in places like Iceland, where protein sources might have otherwise been fairly scarce, you might know skyr is pretty similar to yogurt, but it's made with skimmed milk. It's a little bit thicker, but it is pretty much used in the same application as we would use something like a Greek yogurt today. So tonight's dinner is a replication of kind of like a jarl's feast. So we're going to be eating something a little bit more robust this afternoon. So skyr is the perfect breakfast for us. And we need to leave a little bit of room for that high quality feed that we're going to have tonight. I'm lucky enough this morning that we've come back from market with a pot of rich honey. So I'm going to drizzle on a bit of that with some fresh strawberries and some walnuts for a hearty and truly delicious meal. So tonight we're dressing up in our best to go over to the jarl's longhouse where he's going to feed us with some of the premium food. We've got pork, apple and onion skewers, glazed sausages, glazed root vegetables in honey, some really nice barley buns, and also something sweet. I've heard that there might be apple fritters. Well, I'm making it all, of course, but we're pretending that we're going to a jarl's feast. Now, as moderately wealthy merchants, we wouldn't be at the head table unless we were a special guest of honor. We'd be at one of the lower tables, but we do have decent standing, which means we have a pretty good chance of getting some of the really good stuff. So let's go make the food and dig in. Now I'm adding to my plate a skewer of pork and apple, which would have been roasted. Next plates, I'm grabbing some glistening honey-glazed root vegetables of parsnips, carrots and turnips. You'll notice the absence of potatoes. And of course, most of you will already know that potatoes weren't introduced to Europe until the mid-16th century and wouldn't find their way to Scandinavia for another century after that. Oh look, glazed sausages. These were made from ground pork mince, mustard seed, then cooked in their casings and glazed with a bit of butter, beer and honey. To soak up all those fatty swirls of butter, dripping fat and flavours, barley breads will do the trick, made from a combination of barley and wheat flour with wild yeast and a good measure of salt. It's a step up from that humble flatbread, softer and more delicious. And just when I think the meal is done, the jarl's wife brings out apple fritters. In a batter of rye, wheat and buttermilk, apples are fried in fat until crisp, and can be enjoyed spiced or sweetened with honey, or enjoyed as is. Wash it all down with a good measure of ale, and talk and laugh into the night until you pass out happy and full of food. And if you want to follow the recipes, I'll link my YouTube short series where I go into each of these. Good morning. We are on day 5 of eating like a Viking, and if we had indulged in a jarl's feast the night before, we would have woken up with a bit of a headache and probably feel a bit sore today. And actually, I have woken up with a headache, even though it has nothing to do with overindulging in ale or mead. So that puts me in a good headspace or a bad headspace, depending on what you think, to kind of get a feel for what it would have been like the next day. So because we are preparing for a journey, after our morning duties, which would have been packing our ship, making sure it was all ready to catch the morning tide, our bellies might have been grumbling once we'd boarded and taken off, but we're in the middle of the ocean. So what would we have been eating? Probably something that we packed last night, some provisions that were left over from the feast, like, where's my breakfast? I've forgotten my breakfast. 1 minute, let me go grab my breakfast. It was basically anything that would travel well. So we've got some dried fruit, some leftover provisions from the feast last night, some leftover bread, which is now kind of hard and crumbly, not really nice and soft and pillowy, but it might do well in some stews if we don't eat it. So it's up to you. We've got some dried meat, which also serves really well in stews. And some nuts. We've got some hard cheese, which obviously you'd be eating in the next couple of days because there's no refrigeration. This is what Viking Age travelers would have been eating until they could make camp for the night and make something a little bit more substantial. So happy eating. I'll see you at dinner time. As we're only making camp for one night, we'll keep dinner simple. Into a boiling pot of water, we're adding some more of that dried meat and a handful of grain to bulk it up, a sprinkle of herbs, and we've got a meal to replenish some of those calories we've burned while rowing and sailing. And it's off to bed. I'm sure we'll be hungry in the morning. As expected, everyone has woken up a little more hungry this morning. The tents have been packed up and only the cooking equipment remains. With a long day of river travel ahead, we're going to need something hearty to fuel us for the day. So we're converting our leftover stew into patties, a perfect calorie-packed handheld meal to take with us. Now, there isn't much left. It's basically a dribble in the pot, but it's enough to add a basket full of foraged herbs, a chopped onion, a bit of garlic, a bunch of oats and flour, and a bit of salt, of course. Stir it all into a loose batter and fry them in butter until cooked. Stack them up to keep them warm and enjoy. This meal appears in my third book, Serve the Worthy, and just like Astrid and the other characters of my series, this meal was to be savoured. The pork in mustard sauce is savoury and rich, and the green soup, which would usually have been made from nettles, is substituted for the much more accessible spinach and cooked with leek, pepper, and a little cream. I confess, green tastes very good right now. On our final day, we wake early to complete the short walk to our friend's farmstead. Eager to show their hospitality, they have prepared an enviable breakfast of bacon, stewed apples, and eggs. Bowls of steaming barley pottage fortify even the hungriest of us for the tasks to come. Our crew wolf down our share before getting stuck into helping our friends repair their longhouse. It's a big team effort, but many hands get the work done faster, and a good sing-song puts us all in good spirits. With work on the longhouse nearing completion, the night's meal is celebratory. Barley buns slathered with herbed cream cheese are piled on the tables beside ham cooked in wine and a sampling of vegetables boiled in broth. To finish off the meal, a dish of fruit pudding is served. Boiled fruits of apples and berries, sweetened with honey and buttermilk, and served cold. It's all delicious and not something that we would be used to eating every single day. A true treat. This week has brought some surprising and some very satisfying flavors and textures. At the beginning of this week, I really did have some concerns with all of the grains and how I would feel, but by the end of the week, with the introduction of more fruits and vegetables, I was feeling a lot better. I think personally my favorite time of the year probably would have been berry season, and I think a lot of people in the Viking Age probably looked forward to this time where there was a glut of beautiful berries. And also when greens would have been in abundance. So coupled, the berries and the greens were probably my favorite part of this entire week. And I could imagine for a lot of people having a surplus of greens would have been great for the gut. This week has made me eternally grateful for the varied diet that we have in the modern world. For me, in the far north Queensland region of Australia, I have access to tropical fruits such as dragon fruits, mangoes, papayas, all of which would have delighted and fascinated our Viking Age friends. So let me know in the comments below, which foods would you have struggled with the most in the Viking Age, and what do you think the Viking Age Scandinavians would have struggled with eating in today's modern world? And don't forget to subscribe for more Viking Age history.